And just to let you all know, this meeting will be recorded. We're recording now. If you would not like to be featured on the video, please just keep your video off at all times. I think we'll get started now. So again, welcome to everyone for joining us this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are in the world. We'll find out very shortly in our first set of questions. Welcome to our FAIR Implementation Workshop series. We aim to help 3 different key stakeholder groups: research performing organizations, repositories and data service providers, and national level institutes to become familiar with FAIR enabling tools, approaches, and methods. Each workshop will provide an overview of a specific FAIR enabling activity, share information on recent developments, both within FAIR Impact and other initiatives, as well as offering examples of good practice, practical tips, and recommendations. So FAIR Impact is a project funded under the European Commission Horizon Europe programme and is one of the InfraEOS projects. The project builds on the work of the Horizon 2020 FAIR project and is a coordination and support action focusing on expanding FAIR solutions in Europe. The programme has 28 partners from 10 member states and from the UK. It began back in June 2022 and will run through until May 2025. Essentially, FAIR Impact is working to support the vision of a European open science cloud where FAIR data can be shared and reused. Our work focuses on identifying current and emerging tools, methods, and approaches, and supporting their adoption. A key aim for us is to help ensure that useful resources developed by one community of practice can be adopted by others. At this point, I'm going to go over to our WooClap for our first of 2 questions at this point. So you'll see on the screen that I've got shared is a QR code. You can scan that with your mobile device. If you prefer to use a laptop or desktop, you can type wooclap.com into the web browser and type in the code UHYTKA. You'll only need to enter that code once you've managed to get onto WooClap. There'll be a clear box that will allow you to enter that information. And I can see we've already got 21 of you joined in already. So I can see we've got 73 on the call, so I'll just wait a minute just to allow people to join in. And we'll get started by finding out where you are dialing in from. So I can see almost half of you have joined. So just as a reminder, you can use the QR code by scanning your device, or you can log in through a laptop or desktop by typing wooclap.com and then typing in the event code as well. So we'll get started. I can see over half of you've joined in now. So first question, if you could type in where you're dialing in from. I know we've had a lot of colleagues from across Europe. We've had colleagues from Morocco and as far as Asia as well joining us, and in the States. So I can see as we're going across the screen, we've got plenty of representation from across Europe, which is great to see. I don't know if we've got anyone further afield of Europe at this point, but certainly plenty of European countries represented at this point. I myself am dialing in from Scotland, representing the Digital Curation Centre and FAIR Impact, dialing in from Edinburgh. Surprisingly sunny today as well. So great to see so many of you on the call now. And I'll just give that another 10 seconds or so, as I know we've got a packed agenda with some brilliant speakers lined up today as well. So I don't want to take up too much of their time, but thank you for participating. This will be the first of 4 questions, 1 of 2 to begin with, and closing on 2 more as well. So we'll go to the next section. So what organization do you represent? What's the name of the company that you're working for? And apologies, we've still got a few countries represented here, but we are on to the next question, which is what organization do you represent? Fantastic. Okay, plenty of different organizations. We will share the answers after this, along with the slides and a recording as well. So it won't be slightly more static, because slightly easier to read once you've all been able to submit an answer. As I say, we will share these with the group as well. So plenty of universities represented, research organizations, organizations that I'm certainly familiar with, along with a few new names as well. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today as well. So I'll let that go for another 10, 15 seconds or so. Any last minute submissions in there. Welcome to any colleagues who've just joined us for this FAIR implementation workshop. I'll shortly be introducing our event hosts for the day, and we will get started on the topic itself. Okay, at this point, I'm going to hand over to two of my colleagues in the FAIR Impact Project. We have Deborah Thorpe, who's the Research Data Management Specialist from DANS, and Nina Grau, who works in the FAIR Impact as a project manager from INRAE in France. At this point, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll invite you to share Deborah.
Thank you very much, Al. That was really interesting. So now my next challenge is I'm going to share my presentation, and hopefully I can make it full screen. Is it? Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my presentation now. So
sorry, Deborah, we can just see your presentation notes at this point. If you click the live slideshow at the top, a switch. Should be live slideshow. Yes, perfect.
Is that better?
Sorry,
okay.
Deborah.
You don't need to see all of my notes. Thank you so much, Al, for drawing my attention to that. Welcome, everyone. As Al said, it's really so nice to see so many people here today. I'm Deborah Thorpe, and I'm a Research Data Management Specialist at DANS. And I'm also joined here by my colleague, Nina, who also works on the FAIR Impact project, and you're going to hear from her again later on. So just to kind of introduce you to the program for today. So we're going to be beginning with a talk on sensitivity and data sharing from Roman David, who is a research fellow and data steward for the European Research Infrastructure and Highly Pathogenic Agents. And then we're going to be moving on after that to hear about, from a researcher perspective, about the project SenSign from Leiden University, our colleague Katarina Krusselman. And then we're going to be moving on through the program to hear about a specific type of sensitive data which relates to sharing location data from Pascal Fleur, who also is at Leiden University in the libraries. And then finally, we're going to hear about sensitive data handling in the social sciences before we move on to the question and answer session and another continuation of Al's WooClap questions and some reflections and the session close. So just an introduction to the program. So how did we arrive at this particular program? So firstly, when we were thinking about designing this program, we acknowledged that there are many different types of sensitive data, as you will hear. Perhaps the most familiar type of sensitive data will be personal data. So, for example, names, addresses, and other identifying information collected during a survey or an interview. And our idea with this session today was to take that focus just a small bit away from personal data, although there are overlaps, because that wasn't intended to be the main focus of today. But yes, I'll acknowledge that there are many different overlaps between the types of sensitive data, and the exact focus of the event is guided by our presenters today and also by yourselves. So just some housekeeping there. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat or wait for the Q&As, which will be at the end of the presentations. As Nina has been pasting into the chat, we also have a collaborative notes-taking document. If you have any problems or concerns, please also put them in the chat or send us a direct message, or you can email us afterwards. Please keep your mics muted. So we have quite a lot of us today, so it's important that we try to keep our mics muted. And then also we will be distributing the slides and the recording afterwards via the FAIR Impact website. So as I mentioned, if you'd like to take some notes together, we have a collaborative note-taking document. So that has been posted into the chat, and we can also remind you if you've joined a bit later, we'll make sure we post that link in again. And it may also help us to kind of record some of the key points and maybe even publish some of the thoughts afterwards in a blog. So enjoy the talks. We'll be back at the end with a Q&A and also another WooClap poll and just a sneak peek of the poll questions. If you want to look at them there, they're focusing on what you got out of the session and what you perhaps might plan to take into your day-to-day work based on what you've heard, if you want to think about that as you're listening to the presentations. So I'm going to stop sharing now and I'm going to hand over to Nina to introduce the first speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. Before delving into the main topic, I will briefly introduce today's speakers. So we begin with our workshop with Romain David, who is a research fellow and data steward at the European Infrastructure and on highly pathogenic agents. He holds a PhD and boasts over 2 decades of experience in both terrestrial and marine ecological engineering, life science, information system, and database management and network affiliations. So Romain is passionate about data mining and graph-based methodology. He actively promotes the implementation of data management and plans with fair compliance. He works within a network of BSL-4 laboratories, necessitates enhancement of sensitive data sharing while navigating the policy and the high commitment facilities and addressing the concern of related to the dual use research. So additionally, he serves as a co-chair of the Sensitive Data Interest Group within the Research Alliance, Data Alliance RDA. So to start this event, Romain David will deliver a representative overview and introduction of the topic of sensitive data. So Romain, you can start to share your screen.
Thank you, Nina. So you should be able to see my screen and to hear me correctly, right? Thank you. So
yes,
as I am now very well introduced, thank you very much, Nina. I will not take my time for that. Just to specify about where I am working. It's a laboratory that it's not a laboratory, a federation of laboratories on the level of BSL-4, biosafety level 4. That means that we are working with viruses and other pathogens that are not possible to solve. And it's Ebola, Nipah, Marburg, Crimea, Congo, hemorrhagic fever. And these biocontainment laboratories have unique buildings with complex engineering systems. And all the personnel and the information are at a high level of security, and they are regulated at 2 levels, national and international level. Perhaps it will help to understand some of my remarks later. So what have we to consider for sensitive data? What are the concepts? The concepts are around risk. 4 points are to be considered. The first one is the economical risk. The second one is the interference with security programs and tools that can be existing in a country or in an area. The third one is a misappropriation of knowledge and data that are possible, for instance, to build a weapon. And the fourth one is the terrorism. That's what takes place in my place. In the second point is on the environmental risk. So you can endangering coveted and scarce resource. It's also the case for biodiversity. And the third one, the well-known one, is the personal data. When you see that within another scope, sensitive data main type can be personal data, information that can identify an individual. Health data, so medical record, genetic data, health condition, location data, geographical information that can trace an individual movement, and confidential business data, where proprietary business informations or trade secrets. sensitive government data that are classified or restricted, and cultural and archaeological data that could harm or exploit cultural heritage sites or community. It includes biodiversity. When we want to consider sensitivity in the context of fair data sharing, we have the 4 principles that must be aligned with findability for answering sensitive data that is discoverable without compromising privacy. The accessibility by balancing open access with necessary restriction, interoperability by harmonizing standards for sensitive data across platforms, reusability by ensuring sensitive data can be reused responsibly and ethically, even if you provide rich and appropriate metadata. So the challenge globally are to the privacy breach and data misuse, ethical concern and legal compliance, and technical barriers in security and data sharing. And for this challenge, the mitigation strategies are the anonymization and pseudonymization techniques that are the most well known, the secure data access protocols and data governance framework that you can find everywhere but at different level, and the collaboration with ethics boards and legal teams. When we want to detail sensitivity for fair data sharing challenge, for findability, you have the risk of exposing sensitive information through metadata. And the difficulty in the other side, when you expose when you want to expose metadata in indexing sensitive data while preserving the confidentiality. For the accessibility, it's balancing the need for open access with the protection of sensitive information and navigating legal and ethical restriction on data access at a broad level and harmonized level when you are in between countries, for instance. For interoperability, it's inconsistent standards and protocol across different institutions and jurisdiction. And we can consider also the technical and organizational barrier to integrating sensitive data from different sources. And for the reusability, the challenge that could be considered mainly is ensuring data is reusable without compromising sensitive information. And difficulty is maintaining data integrity and relevance over time. So there is also a sustainability challenge. It's not all the challenge that we have. That's my first thought about it, perhaps to feed the discussion. And the mitigation. So if we can try to find what is in place or what is thought about data sharing, fair data sharing, taking into account sensitivity. For findability, we have controlled vocabularies and ontologies. That means that we need to not reveal sensitive details. It's not often trivial. And the metadata inscription and access control must be also thought at the metadata level. And to prevent unauthorized access or deductible data. For accessibility, it's a tiered access level to create different access level based on user roles and credential to control who can see sensitive data. And the secure data access platform, that is not a big problem. We know that how to do that with authentication and authorization system that are built at the European level today. The interoperability challenge is mitigate with the adoption of common standards. That's I think the stronger on the most difficult to do on the long term on the broader scale. To encourage the use of shared standard and framework with the GDPR indeed, but not only, to ensure that consistency and compliance. And interoperable data format and APIs, using standardized data format and APIs that support secure and efficient data. And the reusability, not the most trivial is the anonymization and pseudonymization techniques that must be increased due to the AI facilities and possibilities. Apply technique to anonymize, to protect identities while maintaining data utility, because sometimes you lose a part of the information and you lose the part of the information that could be the most interesting. And clear data usage policies. So that's a common effort to develop and enforce policies that guide secondary users on how to handle and use sensitive data responsibility. So to summarize, we have three kind of challenge and interoperability challenge. One technical, that is really easy. One semantic, that is a bit more difficult and needs some crosswalk exchange and things on the technical and the semantical organization that are provided by Fair Impact. And the third one is the organization between different stakeholders around these two first challenge. So I will stop here just with this slide, trying to show to you that in our laboratory we have different kind of informations that have their different kind of sensitivity. Sometimes they are classified in 2 or 3 types of sensitivity, but they are managed often in one way by the national security first. This one, and that's all for me. 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. That was perfectly to time, so we really appreciate that. And I'm just reminding you that the questions will be after all of the speakers have spoken. So if you have any questions, then please do put them into the chat. So I'm going to now, without further ado, introduce our next speaker. So Katharina Krusselman is a criminologist at the Institute of Security and Global Affairs at Leiden University, working on sensitive subjects such as firearm violence, homicides, and other violent crimes. And today, Katharina is going to be talking about Project Sensign, and I won't talk about that much more, but I'll hand that over straight to Katharina to give you an introduction and to start her talk. Thank you very much, Katharina.
Thanks for the introduction, Deborah. Can you see the screen well?
Yes, thank you.
Presentation? Okay, perfect. All right, so thanks everyone for joining today. And thanks again for the introduction. I'm here today also in the name of my colleagues, which are listed here on the slides and would definitely deserve a mention. Before I start talking about maybe the project in itself, I want to kind of give a bit of context on how we derived at this project. Because I work in this research group on violence and violence intervention. And as Deborah rightfully said, we have loads of various data sets, including the Dutch Homicide Monitor, which includes a lot of personal sensitive data. Think of personal data such as ages or names, addresses of victims and perpetrators, geographical information about where these homicides took place. And we derive this information from various sources such as the Public Prosecution Office, the Dutch National Police, and so on. And with our data, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, luckily, we have very few homicides in the Netherlands, which actually means that a lot of the personal information is already out there, like in media articles. On the other hand, this also brings us into a dilemma where, for example, if we would apply the traditional anonymization strategies, leave out any of the personal information, and only publish information and data on, for example, which without any of the personal information, but which includes, for example, combinations of the type of crime scene and type of weapon, people may still be able to actually relate that information to a specific case. At the same time, we see a lot of demand for our data, right? From the public, think of journalists, policymakers, but also from students, other researchers, and so on. And we have kind of this dilemma where we want to share our data, but there are so many regulations, such as the GDPR, but also regulations from the police or the Public Prosecution Office, which basically inhibits us from sharing any type of data that we have, because it's so easy to relate any of the data to individuals. So really the question that we see ourselves confronted with is this: what do we do with our highly sensitive data, specifically the individual level data? When we want to make this data fair, right, we can make, for example, our coding book findable and information about where we derive our data from. But specifically when it comes to the accessibility and reusability of our data, usually it's a hard no based on all of the regulations we are confronted with. And we discussed this problem with our colleagues from the Leiden University Medical Center, and they talked us through their approach of using synthetic data. Now, what is synthetic data? That was our first question, and maybe some of yours as well, right? So basically, synthetic data is artificially manufactured data. There are various ways of synthesizing data, but the general idea is that you can start with a data set that can or cannot contain sensitive data, personal data. You apply a model to that data set. That model learns about the general characteristics of your data set and the relationships between variables, for example, and it creates this artificial data set, which basically mimics the original data set without containing any of the personal information, because all of the individual cases in that new synthetic data set are artificially generated. That's the basic idea. So of course it sounds very promising. So we dove into the literature, but what I found was really a lot of very statistical literature about the process of synthesization, right? So which model works best, what type of data, but very little about the application of this technique in order to create data that can be shared. So we decided, let's try this out on our own data. And luckily, I guess for us, during that time, the NWO of like a call came up for projects to finance projects related to open science. We applied, we got the money, so we're now building this bigger project, Project Sensin, where basically we just want to introduce this idea of synthetic data to a broader audience, audiences without a big background in statistics, for example, without a background in data science, because we do believe there's a lot of promise and potential in this idea of synthetic data. Because if I refer back to Romain's presentation from before, it kind of creates this whole new data set to begin with, which can then be shared. So that's what we're currently working on. The project isn't finished. But yeah, again, the general idea is to share this idea of synthetic data. How does it work? What are its limits as well, right? Because it's not the perfect solution. If you look at the right graph you see on the slide here, for example, if we want to create a synthetic data set that is exactly the same as the original data set, then we get maybe into problems when it comes to privacy, right? That some of the artificial cases are actually too similar to the original cases. At the same time, if we want to create a synthetic data set that has roughly the same statistical characteristics, the data might not be as usable, specifically for replication studies, right? So it's kind of this trade-off where we want to really protect the privacy of our participants, but also have still usable data. And what do we do in this project? Is we create hopefully very accessible hand guides, again, on what is synthetic data, what does the process look like, what are the advantages of using synthetic data, as well as the challenges. But the main goal of this introduction to synthetic data is that it's very accessible, specifically to researchers who have no background in data science, because that's also where I'm coming from. So I'm kind of the test person for the guidelines that we're creating ourselves, and really hope to bring this method to researchers working with sensitive data who kind of feel very much need alternative ways to really share the data. And next to these guidelines, which we're going to present also in the form of webinars end of August, beginning of September, we're also, of course, creating a proof of concept with our own Dutch homicide monitor data, right? So we're kind of proving that and showing that it is possible to create the synthetic data set with the original sensitive information. But I think our proof of concept also highlights the limits of synthetic data. So we're trying to be very honest in what it can and cannot do. For that purpose, we're creating an interactive platform, mostly targeted at non-academic audiences, with this synthetic data set. And I'm trying to play a video in the next slide. The platform isn't ready yet, but just to show you, hopefully it works. Yeah. So we create this website, and on this website, users can completely use the data set as they see fit. So we added all types of filters here, as you can see. These may change still in the upcoming weeks, but people can really dive into the data set and try out what they like. They have the same access to the variables that we have in the original data sets. We provide some preliminary analyses, as you can see here, right, to kind of help the users who don't know how to interpret the data. But most importantly, as you can see here, the synthetic data set is fully available, can be downloaded, and other people will be able to reuse it, making hopefully our data a bit more accessible. And again, that's just to showcase what synthetic data could do. And yeah, I personally, after having tried it out for the last few months, really believe that this could be not the perfect, but at least an alternative to sharing, or to not being able to share any of the data we have. And again, I hope to convince other people as well to kind of search for these alternatives and promote them amongst the communities of people who work with sensitive data. Again, any questions? Yeah, happy to answer them later on. And thanks for listening for now.
Thank you so much. Again, beautifully to time, and I can see already there are questions going into the chat, and we're saving them for the end. This is a really nice taster on the different type of work that you're doing, and I hope it's really kind of whetting your appetite to know more about these projects. But I'm going to now hand over to Pascal Fleur. Pascal is a research data management expert and community manager at the Centre for Digital Scholarship, Leiden University Libraries. Prior to taking up the role earlier this year, she worked with us here at DANCE as a research data management specialist, and she has a background as a researcher in archaeology. So in this talk now, she's going to combine her experience of researching in archaeology and also her professional work as a research data management specialist. So thank you very much for joining us, Pascal, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you for the introduction. I'll just share my screen, and you should be able to see the presentation now. So thanks, Jan. Just to reiterate, I didn't mention that before, but yes, it's very much dual between my current job as in data management and my job as a researcher beforehand, and I'm still a visiting researcher in Oxford, so I wanted to mention the project there too. So a lot of what I tell today actually comes from there. So yeah, in archaeology, we do have some personal data, like there are sometimes interviews or this focus group in Jordan that you see. There are some other types of sensitive data, like burial data, which I won't go into at all today. But what I want to talk about is location data, because this is a type which is really key to archaeology. Not to all archaeological data sets, but to many data sets in archaeology. This is an important part of it, without which it might not be or is not so reusable. But it's sensitive in the sense that it might increase looting or illegal excavations if the location of an archaeological site is known. What you see here is an aerial photo of a site in Jordan, which is very obvious, so it wasn't because of data sharing that it's known where it is. But all these little pits that you see are looting pits. So basically the site is completely destroyed. So that's the risk. Archaeology isn't the only discipline where you find sensitive location data. Of course, we probably all think about real-time geolocation data, sort of related to personal data. But also in ecology, you can think of things like location of endangered species, or things like the location of precious resources in geology, or also commercially sensitive, right? And many more. But the focus on archaeology, because we only have 10 minutes, so I keep it to that. Yeah, also wondering basically what Katharina was also referring to. We're looking for this balance, right, where we want to protect the archaeological sites from harm. So in that way, you would say, okay, let's just not share any location data. But without location data, a number of data sets, quite a substantial number of data sets, wouldn't be so valuable, not very much reusable. And there's also the point of you want to also engage the general public also outside of academia with the archaeology. So how do we find this balance? I think we can learn a bit from ecology, where, yeah, quite straightforward, really. Basically, you can look at things like what is the risk of the harm, in this case to an endangered species, like is it endangered, is it subject to harmful human activity potentially? What would the impact of the harm be? So say if the species is threatened by pollution, then revealing the location may not have much of an impact on this harm. And what is the sensitivity of the data set itself? So will the release of the data actually increase the harm? So you can think of, is the location of this group of big elephants already known? Then it may not change very much if you reveal the location. So basically quite straightforward, but a helpful way of determining, should you publish the location data, and to what level should you generalize them or make them less precise? Applying this to archaeology, I'm thinking about, well, could the site be subject to looting, and how sensitive would it be to that? And will the data set, will releasing the data, location data, will it actually increase the looting? And that's, I think, the main question, which is also really difficult to answer, because, you might have people living near the site. They know already that the site is there, right? Is it really unknown, even if it's not published in if the data aren't out there? That's often the question. But basically, I think this can help to decide. And of course, taking into account legal, ethical, and political restrictions. In legal sense, thinking, for example, about the states where, if I'm correct, it's simply not allowed to publish location data of cultural heritage sites. So then, you can apply all the criteria that you like, but you're just not allowed to do it. Well, say if you decide that you want to publish, but you want to obfuscate part of the location data. There are different ways of doing this. This is not an exhaustive list, but I'm just want to highlight a few examples. And I think what's most used is where you decrease the precision or the resolution of the coordinates. So you can see here more precise coordinates. This is Leiden, a satellite image of Leiden. And I think you're all aware of this works, but basically if you have less precise coordinates, if you basically chop off a bit at the end, you have a larger area in which the location, the actual site, could be present, right? And I will do this with decimal degrees rather than what I'm showing here, but you get the idea. Just going back to that, that's quite easy and quick, and it's sort of real data still, even though it's generalized, but it has some disadvantages, like it's not the same distance everywhere, right? These coordinates, I won't go into that too much. But also the reusability obviously also decreases depending on your research question and how detailed you need to know. Like if you need to know the distance to the sea, but your square is partly over the sea and partly inland, that sort of thing. But that's the case with a lot of generalization, of course. You can also, and this is generally, I found people don't like this so much, but you can randomize the data where you, within a radius of the original location, you have a point at a random location in that area. And what can be nice of this method is that you can keep some of the same characteristics. You can set some criteria there, so not just the radius, but also say the distance to a river, which can be important information in archaeology, that sort of thing. So it might be reusable to a bigger extent. As I said, people often don't like to do this. They often feel that the data isn't real and that therefore they don't trust to reuse it, which is of course the objective. So that may be a disadvantage. And it's extra work and can be, complex and a bit daunting, especially if you have to apply a lot of these criteria. So it's maybe not so accessible to apply. What you often see is also that the location is obscured, at least in the public facing part of the data set. You can add a buffer, you could change the shape. What you see here is where the actual precise location is replaced by an administrative unit, in this case, the Council of Leiden. So which is nice, especially for engaging the general public, because you can see here, this coin was found in Leiden, you don't know exactly where, so you can't go and dig up there to find more coins. But at the same time, you can say, oh, that's my city, that's nice. So that's nice. Of course, disadvantages here are that it's quite inconsistent, right? It might be any shape or size, it's a bit arbitrary. And also in terms of research reusability, you lose some detail and certain characteristics, at least with this part of the data set. Then the final one I want to just highlight, I'm not going to go into this, but this is where it's called Discrete Global Grid System, and I put a link there where you can try this out for yourself, as I said, maybe after the session, so you can continue listening to all the other talks. But it's sort of also doing the same, but more with a hexagon view. So it's according to ISO standards, and so it's a bit of a I don't know, more better way to do this, but not so easy perhaps to apply. But anyway, I just don't have time to go into any details, and also maybe not be relevant for your work. So just putting it out there. Finally, one of the things, because I mentioned things like, okay, the public facing or the general data set, of course, what you can do and what is often done are these different levels of access, because generalizing the location data doesn't mean that you would still keep the original data, which are still important for research somehow, and also for protecting the site, for example, by Cultural Heritage Office. So you can have these different levels, and these are just some examples of how this is done in different ways in different databases. One issue there is, of course, as always, with that this needs someone to look after this and someone to decide, and so the sustainability can be an issue when this, especially when it is project based. So some examples, just to sum up. That the location of archaeological sites can be sensitive, and what I think it's necessary to decide if it's needed to hide the location, to what extent, but this is also the most difficult thing to decide. Like, does it really make a difference? Can we share it or not? If you do decide to hide, to obfuscate a location, there are different ways and more than I mentioned. Mentioned before. This is the image that I showed you at the beginning, and one of the things is, these are lots of dots on the map. And if you look in the publication, you will see that I didn't actually share the location data because this is Lebanon, and the Lebanese government is not happy to do that necessarily. So it's not, you wouldn't be able to completely reproduce this map as it is here. So just to, as a takeaway, this is for you for later. And for now, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pascal, for this presentation. Now we are going through the next presentation, which is about the sensitive data on the social science. And it's Hervé Lours that will provide it. So Hervé oversees the repository and preservation matters at the UK Data Archive, located at the University of Essex. And his Essex is a leader partner in the UK Data Service. So UK Data Service serving as the UK service provider to the consortium of European Social Science Data Archive, the CESDA, offers a safer and secure remote access to sensitive data in accordance with the 5 SAFE framework. Additionally, the UK Data Service has been actively engaged in the trustworthy digital repository standards, including Ghost Hostile, and has contributed to the SS, HOS, HOC, sorry, and the FAIRiFAIR project. So this talk will address the identification, retention, and curation and preservation of sensitive digital objects as they progress through the secure research environment. So, Hervé, you can start your presentation.
That's great, Nina. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Let's jump straight in. I think it's probably worth saying, given what's been covered today, that with the exception of physical samples, virtually everything that's been talked about today also applies in this context. So there is a huge amount of overlap on some of kind of like the challenges and the methodologies as well. But for us in particular, we're coming at this from the point of use cases on the FAIR Impact project, the task on persistent identifiers. There are a number of cross-cutting themes for those, but we're focusing particularly on PIDs and sensitive data, looking at the kernel metadata, that metadata that we feel should be floating around along with a persistent identifier for every single digital object, rather than the wider metadata set, and some of the related digital rights management that goes with that. As Nina's kind of outlined, we're doing this from the perspective of CESDA, which is the European Social Science Data Archives, ERIC. My own organization, the UK Data Service, is a partnership between kind of multiple universities. And I'm from the lead partner at the University of Essex, the UK Data Archive. So data about humans in the social sciences is our main context here, but not our sole context. We run a secure remote access system and access via a safe room. We've got a backend, which is a hybrid of file-driven and RDF linked data. So that's a multiple ecosystem environment, and we're certified to ISO 27000 for information security, as well as the Digital Economy Act, which is the UK GDPR implementation. So we're looking at various things in the context of the European Open Science PID policy, and some of those evolving expectations of the PID kernel metadata, which are very much on the move. So we need to look at this from the data and the metadata that make up digital objects, that kernel metadata, and essentially moving at some point into the rights management over time. This means we cover both the sensitive and the non-sensitive data classifications at the point of deposit, during the course of curation and action, and later preservation, especially if sensitivity concerns change. We're looking at handling synthetic data in the future, subsetting, outputs for checking, all that sort of thing. We do this from the perspective of being a trustworthy digital repository, so active preservation and curation is the digital object management, but we also have to look at the organizational infrastructure measures and the technology and security measures as well. Around with us, we do this via the Core Trust Seal, which, as it says, is pretty core. The evidence that we use to deliver service is the same evidence that they ask to see, and it's critical that we're transparent, as those successful certifications are public. But we're not just dealing with the repository's process metadata and business information. Obviously, we're looking at the object metadata and the data as well. So inevitably, and as the topic covers today, we need to look at FAIR. And so everything that we're doing across today is looking at FAIR enabling, avoiding the reduction of fairness over time, increasing fairness where possible, but certainly maintaining the fairness levels as we go through the process. So inevitably, FAIR has been mapped into Core Trust Seal, and Core Trust Seal has been mapped into FAIR, and we look at how these repository and object level pieces of work interact over time. And that final key perspective for us is looking at sensitive data right through the whole of the digital object lifecycle. For these objects as well, we need to look at appraisal and reappraisal over time to see which digital objects will be retained, curated, and preserved. And that's pretty much all from a standard repository lifecycle. But once we start adding sensitive data into that, we're looking at not just personal data, but also commercial and environmental, cultural, and other drivers. It's restricted by design. So we've got a number of sensitivity classifications in place, and these impact our rights management and our access management, which aren't quite the same thing. So going back to those criteria we were sharing before, the core of Core Trust Seal and trustworthy digital repository security just aren't quite enough. There are inherent barriers to the transparency that we've seen the TDRs are looking for. And essentially, we're moving into the world as a repository of mediating reuse as well. It's not just a question of offering a download to a user's or a researcher's desktop for access. So what are the considerations that we've got to go over? Obviously, we've got the classifications of sensitivity, both for the data and the metadata, as we've already heard, and for the different types of data. We've also got to look at the assertions of sensitivity as well. Sometimes these are data owner prescribed rights issues, a self-declaration of sensitivity. This cannot be shared openly. And then we're very interested in looking at the intrinsic properties of the data, making sure that we can do an empirical runtime analysis to see what the level of disclosure risk and sensitivity of the data is. So the big picture for what we've got to look at in the background here are the various pieces of subsetting and linked data that's going on within a secure research environment, within those safe rooms, within those secure remote access environments, how we do the statistical disclosure control to release safer digital objects out into the wild, and what we assign persistent identifiers over time for these objects as well. When we've got multiple serializations and digital objects that are routing to landing pages and catalog records. And one of the key missing ingredients for a lot of this is machine actionability. The other aspect is version management. It's not just about the digital object. It's about being able to apply persistent identifiers, unique identifiers down to the sub-object level, critically with variables, through statistics and questions through surveys, with their own sensitivity ratings as well. So this gets increasingly complex. And one of the reasons we're looking at this is to make some recommendations on the syntax of persistent identifiers and the underlying semantics for the PID data kernel, and across towards some of the projects that are running under FAIRcore for EOSC as well. Now, the perspective we take locally is the 5 SAFEs framework. And we've used the phrase here, as open as possible, as protected as necessary. We messed up on that slide. The key thing to think here is that we're using protected rather than closed. We really do want to highlight that this is a necessary protection for legal reasons that we can't avoid. It's not just a question of keeping data restricted for some kind of other more arbitrary reason. And the 5 SAFEs framework means that we look at this from the perspective of the safe data, delivered through safe projects, which are a benefit to society. Do we have safe people? Do we do this in safe environments, in safe settings? And are the outputs through statistical disclosure control made safe? Once you add all of these ingredients into the traditional repository setup, you do have a bunch of extra things to think about in terms of infrastructure, those safe settings that we've talked about, the trusted research environments, the safe rooms, the secure remote access, the supporting services. We've got to manage researcher training, approval and statistical disclosure control as well, which are currently extremely manual activities. We need additional resource and expertise, which is not often regularly available. And then we need to really understand the objects, the subsets, the links, the outputs. And for each of these, depending on the need of the researchers, whether they've been made public or not, we need to think about the levels of retention, curation and preservation, and therefore also whether they'll need to be cited in the future, whether they need persistent identifiers, on what level of metadata they need to support them. So there are multiple aspects to this which get added onto the repository infrastructure once we're handling sensitive data. And this final fun diagram here is what happens when you start to take this into the machine actionable world. This is taking some of this information that we've got about the sensitivity levels and the access criteria and taking the first steps towards looking at some of the duties and the permissions and the prohibitions around the actions that you're allowed to take over those digital objects as both a repository and a researcher. This particular model is taken from the open digital rights language, which we're looking at as a possible way of enabling that 5 SAFEs in a more machine actionable way. So just to come on to our expected outcomes and some of the added value we're looking for here, just a final slide to say that yes, the project will be looking at providing some actual practical guidance on optimal PID usage, both the access and the management for the sensitive data and sensitive digital objects in general. We're hoping that this will lead to some more consistent handling of sensitive data within and between the secure environments. We've heard about the interoperability factor here as well. And then overall more efficient use of PIDs for sensitive data to benefit research and deliver both societal and economic impact. And that is, after all, what we're here to do this for. At a more infrastructure level, what we're looking at is whether or not we need some more high-level kernel metadata on both sensitivity and access restrictions at an open metadata level to support some of these workflows, and what steps we can take towards machine readable and machine actionable rights management, so that these things can be done consistently within and across repositories and across environments. And I think that's me done.
Thank you so much for concluding the talks today. Another just really interesting presentation, and also we have lots of questions popping up. Hervé, would you unshare your screen?
If I can find out how to maximize this, it might show.
And then while you're doing that, I'm just going to have a look at the questions. So I thought probably the best thing to do is that I'm going to just have a look at the questions that we've been asked, and just pick a few. I think we have about 5 minutes to do some questions. So I'm going to also put the question that I've chosen into the chat now, and then whoever is being asked can also read it, so that I don't misrepresent the question asker. So the first question is from Pat there, and this is for Hervé. Are PIDs standardized, i.e. are they RIIs as RDF mandates, or are they something else? And if something else, can be multiple else's? If so, then how is the data itself interoperable? And Pat, if you want to say anything more to that question, just unmute yourself, but I'll hand over to Hervé.
The answer from our perspective is that they are DOIs minted through DataCite at the study level. And there is a very open question about how, in a cost-driven environment, you go to implement those down to an incredibly granular level. So one of the things we need to look at is how the version management works, and how you could look for a low cost, no cost opportunity to identify persistently right down to that individual variable or that individual question level. So that's a real open question, and one of the dependencies is a common version management approach. For us, it's particularly a challenge because it's version management within RDF, and that linked open data has got its own evolving version expectations. So yeah, at the top level, they're standardized. At the lower level, it's a question that's still very open.
Thank you. And I should mention, if anything has occurred to you that you haven't already put in the chat, please just raise your hand and I'll get to you when I've asked a couple of the questions from the chat. So the next question that I'm going to put in the chat now is for Katerina. So the question is, when working with synthetic data, do you need to maintain any link to the original data set, for example, for validation?
Yeah, I mean, of course, ideally, yes, but if we keep that link, for example, it wouldn't be possible for us to publish this web application we made, right? So in this process of synthesizing data, depending on which model you use, a lot of the already existing models and for example, R or Python packages already include reports. So there are reports generated about the usability of the data, about the privacy guarantees / the privacy risks of the specific synthetic data set you created, which we can also use as a type of validation, as additional information to put out there in addition to the synthetic data set. For example, when I take the web application, the interactive one we now created, there's no link to the original data set. I synthesized the original data set, created the synthetic data set, downloaded that data set, and then created the web application, meaning there's no direct link anymore. But of course, you always want to keep some type of validation, for example, in the form of these reports that can be generated about the synthetic data set.
Thank you. And if whoever has asked the question has any follow-up, then please just put your hands up, because I can't always see who asked the question because we've been copying them over as we go. But if not, I'll assume that your question has been answered. So I have a question for Pascal. It's quite a long question, so I'm just going to post the question into the chat, just for your information, but I'll just read the beginning bit, and then Michael, if you want to jump in and ask anything else, please feel free to do so. So the question is for repository managers, and particularly those who manage data and institutional repositories, is there a checklist or a series of questions or assessment tools to determine if a data set is sensitive or not? Actually, this could probably be a question for Roman as well. So please do give us your thoughts, Pascal, and Roman, if you have any thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think it's not maybe not specifically for me because
Yeah,
I'm
I
the
think
repository
so.
manager, but I can answer it a bit in a sense that, well, maybe someone that manages repositories can say how this is done, but basically what's also important is some repositories do check this and some don't, but that it's in the end it's the institution, or say the university, for example, other organization in the form of the researcher who remains responsible, right? So repositories don't always check at all. So that's important to know. And as a, yeah, I can speak in my case, it's well known as a researcher, I know what is sensitive and what isn't, and I make my decision on that sense. And of course, for personal data, universities do often now have something in place to double check that, because there's also legal implications otherwise. And there are some, I was thinking about links, but there are some tools, because that's also part of the question, like is there a checklist or there are some, what's it, like these, with these arrows that you say, do you have this, do you have that? There are some, that sort of tool are about where you can check a bit easily if your data is sensitive or not, although they're often focused on personal data, so they don't include all the sensitive data. I don't know if that answers the question. I was trying to read it very quickly. But...
I know. Thank you, Pascal. And Roman, do you have any thoughts more broadly from your expertise in this area?
Just two ideas. The first one is about a checklist like that. It supposes that you have well-defined level of sensitivity. And it's not always the case when you have, for instance, a European project, you have national law and regulations and national sensitivity for each type of data. Even if you have the the RGPD for the personal data, that is easier, but there are checklists on it. For the others, you can have to take in account the context of your data. And the habitude of that on this topic is when you don't know, it is sensitive. After, to go further, when you have some data or some information that are already public, for instance, imagine a meteorite arriving on the Earth and everybody is knowing it's a sensitive information, but as everybody is knowing it, we don't care. So it depends of the context, so the impact of the data, and how it is also perceived by all peoples that could be under the risk.
Thank you very much. And I should mention as well, we have the collaborative document with the questions that we've been recording. And if any of the speakers feel like going and having a look at the questions that they've been asked and maybe adding an answer, that's no obligation on you. But if you feel like doing that, then of course you're welcome, or just if you want to see what kind of questions you were asked, because we don't have a huge amount more time, and we want to finish up with the last woo clap poll, but I want to just finish off with another question for Katarina. I'm going to put that in the chat now. To Katarina, are there any compliance points concerning existing laws, e.g. GDPR, while using or transforming personal data to synthetic data?
Yes, of course. So it's not just the final data set that need to be considered as potentially sensitive or containing personal data, but also if you use the original data set in the transformation, which you'll have to, of course, there are still the regulations that apply. So for example, there are already quite a few commercial organizations who can transform the data, whatever type of data you have for you, into a synthetic data set. But obviously with our sensitive data, we cannot use those, right? So even in that process, we have to continuously review what methods we are using, and whether those comply or make us not comply or not with the GDPR or any other types of regulation. So that's still certainly a concern, which also means there isn't like, I cannot give you one model, right, that works for sensitive data, because it depends on the type of data you have, and again, what you want to achieve with that, with the synthesization of your data. But in the synthesization process itself, the privacy or the sensitive nature of the data certainly still is a concern.
Okay, thank you so much for those answers to the questions. Al, would you mind sharing your last questions in the WooClap? We just want to make sure that we have got kind of a sense of what you may have got out of today's session. So if you go back to the WooClap, if you've still got it open, if not, then maybe we can share the link into the chat. Let me just see if I can get the link, or if someone else could share it for me. And the first question that we're asking is, what did you get out of today's session that could help you with your own work? So, thank you so much for putting the link in the chat. So I'm just going to give everyone a few seconds to think about perhaps what they feel like they might have learned from today's session, or what your take-home message might be from hearing the presentations and the questions today. So I'm going to add my own response, and I'll see what's coming up. Okay, so I can see that there's some answers coming up that are almost too fast for me to read. So I can see that clear interest there in synthetic data. So Katerina, that topic is very interesting. And it seems to be a way to kind of, it seems to be provoking a lot of interest there. Sensitive data seems to be central for a lot of people. Again, interest in synthetic data. A clear overview of complex use cases. So yes, I agree. It was a really nice introduction to lots of different projects and levels of expertise. So that was absolutely fantastic. How to transform data. Yes, sensitive data is more than just personal data. And I think that's something that is really important to recognize. And I know that there'll be a lot more interest and work in that area in the near future. How to better support researchers on sensitive data. Masking location data. Yes, I think that was a very practical presentation from Pascal, and other links to follow up. And we'll be sharing the presentations afterwards, so you can have a look into that in more detail. And the potential sensitivity of metadata. Yes, so we often think about the sensitivity of the data, but also the metadata. So thank you so much for your answers there. And as Al said earlier on, we'll be kind of saving the answers in a way that might be more easier for you to read in the future. Would you like to move on to the next question? Okay, so, hopefully this is relevant to you. And if not, maybe think about what action others might take based on what you've heard. So what kind of action do you think you might take based on what you've heard already? So what is the kind of practical thing that you may have learned that you'll be able to take into your day-to-day work, or the way that you advise researchers? So read up on the sensitivity of metadata. Yes. It's very, I can't see the whole of that answer, but I'm sure it will be. Yes, so it's very useful for supporting our researchers. We're almost ready to launch an institutional repository, and I'm ready for a number of questions about the FAIRification of data. Yes, I think that's really, really positive to hear that it's been useful, and you can pass on what you've learnt to researchers who might be asking you questions. Digging into the encryption of metadata. if a synthetic version of our data can be generated. Can you open that one there, Al? Why distinguish sensitive data from other data? Sensitivity is merely one aspect of the dynamic context with which anyone, anywhere works with data ever. So yes, a provocation. If anyone has any thoughts on that, please chime in. Supporting more open science and sensitive data research and funding bids at Leiden. Yes, I saw that there are quite a few representatives from Leiden today, so that's really good to hear. Yeah, thank you very much for your answers there. And just, if you wouldn't mind unsharing, Al, and I'm just going to share the last slides as we start to wrap up. All right, are you seeing my notes again, Al?
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh, there we go.
Okay,
Thank you
you
very much. I'll pass over to Nina.
Yeah, so as we are reaching the end of the workshop, so I would like also to thank like all the speakers and for your enlightening presentation, and also to each of you for your active presentation and contribution. So thank you once for your attendance and your engagement. If you have like any questions or additional questions, we add our email to Deborah and mine also at the end of the collaborative notes. So you can contact us at any time. And we will let you know once the recording will be available online on the FAIR Impact website, and once all the slides will be available. So thank you very much, and I hope we will keep in touch.
Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And thank you for everyone who was taking notes in the collaborative document there. Thank you very much. Bye.